Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. Ms. Chedinkaya, thank you for bringing more light here to the ongoing horror that is the Uyghur genocide. From my observation, the ESG movement in practice sometimes feels like the E-only movement. It ignores social and governance impacts in the rush to achieve specific environmental objectives. There is a major risk that the new battery economy is strengthening our strategic adversaries, undermining Canadian workers, and causing untold suffering among Uyghurs, but also people in the DRC who are often exploited by Chinese companies. So we need to be smart about how we respond to these changes. And yet some, in spite of these realities of social and governance impacts, press forward with their kind of one-track mind. I think we need to have an approach that aligns with our economic interests, our strategic interests, and our moral obligations. And that is why Conservatives have pushed for strong measures to counter the strategic efforts of the Chinese Communist Party to dominate the market through tactics that are both anti-competitive and immoral. You spoke in your opening statement about the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, a bipartisan bill that passed in the United States that creates a reverse onus, essentially a presumption that those companies that are operating in East Turkestan or Xinjiang are using forced labor. Why is this presumption reasonable in your view, and should we adopt legislation in Canada that aligns with this bipartisan piece of legislation in the United States?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. I want to start by saying 100% this electric vehicle battery, the EV batteries are also the exploitation in the DRC is very prominent. When it comes to specifically the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act within the U.S., even the Canadian government has released a study called the Study of Supply Chain Risks Related to Xinjiang Forced Labor, where they clearly state that this is a legislation that we want and trying to adopt within Canada, whereas the U.S. legislation is significantly stricter, assuming all products coming in from that region, because there is a lot of evidence and a lot of reports that show us that things such as cotton, which even our report that the government of Canada has released states that 85% of so-called Chinese cotton is coming from East Turkestan, which means this is directly being linked to the slave labor of Uyghur people, as well as things like tomatoes, solar panels, polysilicon is coming from the region of East Turkestan. Therefore, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is assuming that because of the backing and reports and the facts that are behind these different products that are with forced labor, that anything coming from that region can be assumed to be forced labor because of how it is all interlinked.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things people say about enforcement around forced labor is that it's complicated. It's complicated to unravel these supply chains and figure out exactly what came from where, and to have proper identification and accountability. But it would seem to me that if complexity is the challenge, then we could simply be aligning with our American friends and partners to have an aligned regime so that if a shipment is turned around from docking and unloading its goods in the United States, the same shipment could not be unloaded in Canada. And yet, we haven't pursued that kind of alignment. If we had alignment, we could be sharing information. It would actually make our enforcement much easier. And this is in a context where, based on the numbers you presented, the Americans are succeeding and we're failing. They are stopping many shipments. We're not stopping any shipments. And those shipments that are being stopped on their way to the United States could well be coming to Canada. So why don't we pursue greater collaboration with the United States, greater information sharing on forced labor? Wouldn't that solve the problem?
I 100% agree. I think that while both countries, neighboring countries, have the same goal in mind, we do not want forced labor. We do not want to be complicit in a genocide, no matter how far away it is from our home here in Canada or the U.S. If the U.S., and it's clear, like you said, has these legislation in place, has the materials, has the resources in place to detect forced labor within shipments, we should 100% be aligning with them, working together with them, and then we can even expand it further and make sure that we can, really have a hand in stopping the use of forced labor.
By expand it further, I suppose you're talking about seeking to partner with other like-minded democratic countries on a collaborative framework to keep forced labor out that benefits workers within the free world and that puts pressure on China to put a stop to this Uyghur genocide. One final question. The USMCA contains provisions on combating forced labor. There's an obligation on the part of parties to that agreement to take actions to combat forced labor. It doesn't include any kind of an alignment of structures, but it includes a commitment. It seems to me a bit of a trade risk if the Americans are able to see that they're putting a stop to forced labor products coming in from East Turkestan and that Canada is not. That raises some questions about our compliance with that agreement. And it seems like a win-win if we could try to bring Canada into line with that agreement and collaborate more with the Americans in order to avoid potential criticism that we're not living up to our trade obligations. I'm basically out of time, but maybe just quickly if the chair will allow your response to that.
100%, I completely agree. We should have, unity and collaboration with like-minded countries when it comes to forced labor.